Okay, I'm going to try and show how I deal with blending my Suri shortcuts. And, you know, I'm going to start off with the equipment that I use. Of course, I've got my Petite, which is a Strauch Petite. It's an older version, it's an older model. And at this point, it actually does need to be adjusted again. And you can see that there's a little bit of a gap there. I'm going to open one of these and actually move it a little closer on this side. Of course, it's a little older machine, so I have to be careful because you don't actually want it to do much actual touching. And obviously right there it is, just a little bit. So I'm going to leave it there and lock it in place. Two hands when I start actually making the batt. This thing right here is my lifesaver. It's actually a hairbrush cleaner, and I can use it to flick little stragglers, which the slicker liquor in brush drum on the Strauch is very, very nice for not wrapping stuff around very much. It does a really, really good job of allowing things to feed onto the main drum really, really well. I tend to use a lot of dog slicker brushes just because they're perfect size for my hands. And this was the Doffer brush that came with my Strauch. You can tell it has been well abused in its lifetime, and I don't actually use it very much. I tend to use the softer dog slicker brush. For the fine Suri shorts that I use, I actually have a tendency to use these hand carders. These are Ashford hand carders, and they're the curved ones, mainly because they get the job done of what I need done, which is just opening the fibers up. I have a tendency to do a lot of hand manipulation when I'm working for doing a blended batt, and a lot of pre-drafting to break up the fibers and make it much thinner so that it will feed onto the carder in a much more even pace. So these guys I have a tendency to use with the short fibered Suri that I am working with and blending. And this is some that I've actually pulled off of the carder, or hand cards, excuse me, here recently. And you can tell that they're kind of in an oriented fashion, and that's the way I want it. I want it to be pretty oriented, because I'm actually going to take it and draft it out almost like it's top and make it extremely thin, and then I'll pull it out sideways and let it feed in onto the carder. My first order of business, however, is to put down a really, really thin layer of merino. It seems to come off of the carder much better if I use the merino first, and I do the exact same thing with it. I will draft it out incredibly thin and long, and then I will work on getting it fed on to the machine. So let me move some of this out of the way first. Okay, now for this stuff, literally I just pull out a really small amount, and from there I will end up just drafting it out, pre-drafting super fine. And that actually takes a little while, so I'll be back once I've got it drafted out. Okay, I'm back. I still have this much left over of what I had originally pulled off. I've only pre-drafted out this much fiber, and this is what I'll feed on first. I have a tendency to pull this out almost completely out from underneath here, because once I get it laid on, I will actually then use the board itself to feed into the liquor in. I also really like using a plastic piece back here. It keeps it from grabbing on the end of the wooden piece. From here, I just simply, you can see how thin this is. I mean, this is pretty thin. But I'm going to end up taking it and really making it into cobweb by pulling it sideways. So I get really finicky about this, and some people, probably could get this done a lot faster than I am. I'm pretty new to using a drum carder, and I'm pretty finicky about the way I want my Rolex coming off of this thing. So, please don't take this as being the only way to do it. Let me see if I can get zeroed in a little better on the liquor in the drum. You're not able to see completely across it, but you'll be able to see pretty close in to what it's doing as I'm allowing it to feed in. Now you'll notice that I do end up sliding my board in a little further. Now I'm going to go ahead and I actually lift my brush, so the first couple of rounds where it's starting to feed on, I actually do not use the brush. It leaves it off, and I actually go really slow with this. The clicks that you're hearing are a couple of malaligned teeth, because this thing is much older and it's just barely touching, but it's just enough to, really make me slow down even further whenever I'm feeding this in, just because of the actual speed that I'm using, which is almost nil. You'll notice that the liquor in will actually work really nicely to align that fiber as it goes onto and feeds onto the main drum, which is what I want it to do. Now, if you want it to be a little more jumbled, a little more woolly, then you can feed it on much faster. But this particular one, I'm going to stop here and actually fluff out the rest of my my pre-drafted fiber, so that I can go ahead and feed the rest of this on there, and then I'll show you feeding on what I do to feed on one of the layers of the Suri alpaca shorts. Okay, there we go. But you'll notice that there's not very much fiber that I've put on here to begin with, and I've found that I really don't need very much fiber to put on here initially to begin with. And you'll notice that the liquor in is pretty much staying completely clean, which is actually what I want it to do. I want it to be feeding onto that main drum, and it works really, really well. It was just a lucky buy for me that I found this one that somebody was selling and was able to fix it and figured out that I could fix it. So I am really, really happy with this particular drum carder. I'm sure there's just as many positive points about other drum carders out there, and I have not used them. I'm sorry, I can't give you a comparison. I'm just really happy with this one as my first purchase. Okay, that's all of the merino at this point. And if you'll notice, there's pretty much not anything left on the liquor in at all. I'm going to put the brush down on the top and hold it in place and let it kind of pack that down a little further in there. And for this, I can actually do it pretty quickly. Now, I'll end up taking that back up and it is so light that, you know, you really have to look close to actually even see whether or not there's anything on it. You can see that there's very, very little fiber on there. That's zoomed in really close. And what's on there is just a bare coating. And that's really what I want, because I use a very alpaca heavy blend when I'm making these. Now I'm going to go back to my Suri. Now this stuff, I'll pull out just a little piece here to kind of give you an idea of actual staple length. Now, that's one end. This is the other end. So this is actually a little bit longer for this particular pieces of Suri, which is about maybe 3.5 inches. And that's pretty short. I tried combing this, and it was a true pain to deal with that way, because some of it is as short as 2 inches. It actually spins up wonderfully using it the way that I'm using it in this blend. And for this, again, I just pre-drafted out. I want it really thin, so I'm just going to pre-draft, just like if it was actually top or roving. And the more I pre-draft it, the more aligned the fibers actually get. Now, I'm not going to pre-draft all of this out, because I'm going to come back and I've got to make it even thinner. And yes, with it being this short, it is actually kind of hard to deal with, because although this has a little bit of combing milk in it, just to keep it from being flyaway on me, I still want it really, really thin to feed on as evenly as I can get it to feed on. You know, you can see how thin this is. You know, I mean, it's just cobweb on there. And I pretty much do the same thing. I pull my board back out, and then I work on stretching it out. Just like I did with the merino. I want it to be really, really thin all the way across, so that it will feed on as evenly as I can possibly get it to feed on across the entire width of the drum. And I use about a 60% of Suri to about 40% of merino when I'm doing this. So, you know, you can see that this is really, really thin as I'm feeding it on there. So again, I do pretty much the exact same thing. And okay, let me see if I can get it all zoomed back in again. Now then. Alright, so I pulled my brush back up so that it's not actually in contact, and at this point I just really slowly start feeding, and you should be able to see it kind of pulling some of those little fibers underneath there now. And there's the first of it beginning to feed on. And it feeds on pretty much just like the merino. You know, as long as I go really slow, it feeds on really cleanly. And it will pretty much align those fibers when you're going this slow. I'm only assuming, because that's all I can do, that pretty much any fine carder will kind of do this as you're beginning to go around and getting this stuff to feed on. So, you know, and I'll end up putting quite a bit of this on there, because I've actually got way more of this that I need to get fluffed out, and it takes what seems like to me longer amounts of getting it fluffed out, because of course it's not arranged quite as nicely as that merino top. You know, if I can keep it feeding really nicely and evenly, then There you see what I call one of my clumps, but it's still fed on really nicely. Now I'm beginning to have gone around quite a few times with this, and this has a tendency to get a little more flyaway. So now that I've started to get a little bit more of a coating with it on top of the merino, I go ahead and put the brush down. And that way it kind of goes ahead and presses that on in there so that it doesn't want to be as flyaway. Because it will get flyaway if you don't encourage it to stay on the drum. Okay, now I'm getting back to where I haven't got any more drafted out. That actually feeds on even faster than the merino does. The merino has a little bit longer staple than this, but not by much. And it seems to be a little grabbier, of course, than the alpaca does. Tiny piece of grass. Come out to there. There you go. All right. I'm hoping you can see that feeding on there really well, because that's it. To me, it's just incredible how well this stuff feeds on when you go this slow. When you're not going slow, these Suri shortcuts will, you know, just, they do all kinds of weird, goofy things. I know, this is kind of like waiting for water to boil. Now there's the first little clump that did not want to stick where I want it to stick. So, I take him and then just brush it up. You have to be really careful with this liquor in because it will eat you alive. You definitely want to be up on your tetanus shots before you start playing around with a Strauch liquor in, because they have teeth and they don't mind biting you. Not by a long shot. There is another tiny piece of grass. Come out of there. Then. Now I actually do feed this on to, feed this on, and I'll do multiple layers. I probably did 10 to 12 layers in the last bath that I did, and then I pull it off, and it takes forever to draft the thing out and get it to feed back on. And I pre-draft it out almost as thin as that, and then put it through there again, and I will then do it a third time as well, because I want this really, really well blended. But that's just personal preference. It spins just as fine without blending it that well, but without blending it that well, I feel, my personal opinion, is that the alpaca won't be locked in as well, and so it's going to have more of a tendency to work its way loose. Now all of that's on there. Press the brush down and pack it in a little bit better. I don't use my dog slicker brush at this point to pack it in further, because this is such a light coating. Let me see if I can get it where you can see up close. I'm going to try this without. all the playing around with the camera stand. And you can see that it is a very, very light coating. Um, there are some places that it kind of missed in the middle because of this light coating. But as I layer this further and further, I will actually end up being able to get it much more even across the entire width. And then of course when I run it through a second and third time, it will blend this in wonderfully well. And I'm ending up with this beautiful creamy brown, like very, very light cocoa. It's, I just love it. I think it's gorgeous. And it spins through your hands like butter. I'm actually spinning it really thin, but you could spin this even thicker and it would be like a cloud. It's just super, super soft and incredibly silky feeling to your fingers. Now, the very last part of my preparation is actually just 2 dowels. And I actually just roll the whole thing off really carefully and slowly from the drum, actually as a humongously gigantic rolag. And from there, you know, I just very loosely twist it open a little bit and draft straight out of the end. Just, I pull it out, not quite as thin as what you were seeing me pull out for feeding into the carder, but very, very similar. And spin straight from that, and it spins so easy. I can't tell you how much of a joy it is to spin. I cannot begin to produce as much as fast as I need to be able to keep up with how fast and easy I can spin this stuff. It's wonderful. I hope that helped you. Bye.